Tonight, we are digging into the impact of forever chemicals across the country and in our state, and what can be done about it. These chemicals are known as PFAS, a set of man-made toxins which have been tied to countless health problems. So let's begin with Adam. He is breaking down some of those health risks for us.
Yeah, Wendy, and according to the EPA, if you eat or drink food or water contaminated by PFAS, the chemicals are absorbed. They have a tendency to accumulate in the body and stay there for a very long period of time, and that can lead to major health problems. Several studies have linked PFAS chemicals to low birth weight, reproductive problems, weakened childhood immunity, weight gain, increased cholesterol, and cancer, including testicular, kidney, liver, and pancreatic cancer.
Several states are suing the companies responsible for these forever chemicals. Dozens of state attorneys general have filed lawsuits. Last month, Attorney General Gentner Drummond told us he's considering litigation as well. Manufacturing company 3M agreed to a $10 billion settlement after being accused of contaminating public drinking water with forever chemicals. This was part of a class action suit filed in district court in South Carolina. In a statement, the company said the settlement will be paid out over 13 years. The funds will be used to test and filter PFAS from public drinking water. 3M says the settlement is part of its promise to stop all PFAS manufacturing by 2025.
That settlement doesn't just impact South Carolina. There's a law firm involved that says all municipal drinking water providers, which includes municipalities and cities, can join in the case if they have any detectable level of PFAS contamination in their water.
Edmond City Council took contingency action tonight in case it ends up joining. Just hours ago, council voted to approve bringing in outside legal counsel in the event this happens. Fox 25's Tom Ferguson joins us live from Edmond with a breakdown of what you need to know. So, Tom, first of all, is the water in Edmond contaminated?
Wendy, officials say there's no indication of any issues along those lines at this point, which of course is good news. They say they're constantly testing their water to make sure they're in compliance with regulations. Now we took a look at the lawsuit at the center of all this.
General consent items 5A through 9, and we have
Now the city says it became aware of this suit over PFAS and AFFF chemicals, possibly in drinking water elsewhere. Those are known as forever chemicals because once they get into soil and water, they stick around for a long time. According to the National Institute of Standards and Technology, these chemicals are linked to certain cancers and are dangerous. These chemicals have been used in firefighting foam. The city says if it was impacted in any way, it may have to conduct tests and expensive remediation requirements. They told they would then use that money from the lawsuit to help cover those costs. Approving outside counsel from McAfee and Taft and Fulmer Sill would come at no immediate cost for the taxpayer. They'd get paid out of the settlement should it go that far. Now, the companies mentioned in this include DuPont and 3M. They reportedly paid out billions in water contamination settlements earlier this year. DuPont said it wouldn't comment because no action had been taken when I reached out. 3M says, though, in part, quote, "We have and will continue to deliver on our commitments, including remediating PFAS, investing in water treatment, and collaborating with communities." And coming up tomorrow, the city of OKC will be taking a look at a similar issue when its council gets together. Live in Edmond, Tom Ferguson, Fox 25 News.
All right, Tom, thank you. And breaking down some of the findings of that class action lawsuit, court documents show the companies knew of the health and environmental risks associated with PFAS compounds for decades, but concealed that knowledge until it was exposed through litigation and regulatory action. Now, the lawsuit claimed 3M concluded PFAS were toxic in its own internal studies all the way back in 1950. 3M began monitoring the blood of its employees for PFAS as early as 1976 because 3M was concerned about the health effects. They found a universal presence of at least one form of PFAS in blood samples taken from across the U.S., but did not share this information outside of the company. As for old DuPont, the company scientists issued internal warnings about the toxicity associated with their PFAS products as early as 1961. They also took blood samples from workers, and by 1979, they had data indicating that exposed workers had a significantly higher incidence of health issues than unexposed workers. Old DuPont did not report this data to any government agency or community. Now, as more Oklahoma towns have water quality issues, we are learning about how PFAS may be to blame.
Let's go to Fox 25's David Chazanoff. He spoke with the Department of Environmental Quality. And David, what'd you find out?
Adam and Wendy, Shelley Chard with the DEQ tells me there are thousands of PFAS chemicals. Experts are still researching the impacts this may have, but early results aren't encouraging.
It's ubiquitous. It's everywhere.
Shelley Chard with the DEQ says PFAS compounds are used in things like firefighting, clothing, and makeup.
So we know we're seeing it much more than we have before, but we're certainly looking for it much more than we ever have before.
It can also be found in our water supply.
These compounds we're monitoring in the 4 parts per trillion range. So it's very small amounts.
But even a small amount could cause health problems.
You could have impacts to increased cancer risk. You could have impacts to reproduction.
It can also reduce the effectiveness of some vaccines. But Chard says people can still do their part to stay safe.
Making smart choices and looking at ingredients to determine if there are any of these PFAS compounds in the materials that we're buying every day.
As an agency, the DEQ participates in the federal drinking water monitoring process called the Unregulated Contaminant Monitoring Rule 5, which examines nearly 30 PFAS compounds.
Most of Oklahoma's drinking water systems are participating in that. And I can tell you we've only had 2 systems so far that have showed above detection levels, and they're both in northeastern Oklahoma.
And according to Chard, the cities of Broken Arrow and Nowata have just a smidge more PFAS chemicals in their water. Reporting live in Oklahoma City, David Chazanoff, Fox 25 News.
Thank you, David. Now take a look at this map here. It shows documented PFAS contamination in the United States according to the Environmental Working Group. You can see here there's several areas in Oklahoma that are impacted. The map shows PFAS above the proposed limit been found in cities like Bethany and Broken Arrow. According to the organization, PFAS contamination was also found within the groundwater on Tinker Air Force Base in 2017. The suspected source was firefighting foam. Some other contamination sites listed are Vance Airport Base, Fort Sill, and the Will Rogers World Airport. Firefighting foam also listed as the suspected source for those.
A new study shows nearly half of tap water in the U.S. has toxic forever chemicals called PFAS. According to the U.S. Geological Survey, at least one forever chemical could be found in 45% of drinking water samples. There are more than 12,000 types of these chemicals. Now, several brands of bottled water were also tested for PFAS, but unlike the tap water, there were no detectable PFAS chemicals in the bottled water. The International Bottled Water Association reported nearly 70% of all bottled water is produced using city water sources. A multi-stage purification process is why bottled water at the supermarket that came from a municipal water utility is actually cleaner and safer than the same city water that comes from your tap. According to the CEO of the Texas bottled water company Artesia Springs, there's one main reason why bottled water consumption increases each year.
I think a lot of it is for the fear of what's in the water. People are buying our 5 gallons by the pallets.
When asked why many cities don't purify the water they supply the community like bottled water companies do, CEO Rudy Ramon says a lot of it comes down to money and how much they would have to put into it.
Well, hundreds of military bases all across the United States contaminated with forever chemicals. Spotlight on American National correspondent Chris Daniels takes a closer look.
Drive over Deception Pass in Washington State and you'll be exposed to some of America's most beautiful views. But here at this scenic spot on Whidbey Island, just north of Seattle, there are growing concerns about what else people are being exposed to from this island's naval air station.
So you moved here for the beauty of the island?
The beauty, yeah.
And you discovered something else?
Right. These chemicals are a curse.
The chemicals environmental activist Rick Abraham is talking about are known as PFAS, a set of man-made toxins which have been tied to cancer and other health problems. For decades, these chemicals were used in a type of firefighting foam on military bases, sprayed by the gallon on runways during training exercises and to douse fires, including here at Naval Air Station Whidbey Island. Government leaders confirmed those toxins seeped their way into the soil and drinking water of surrounding communities.
Do you believe there are people getting sick right now because of what's happened there?
Yes, I do.
On Whidbey Island, the Navy's own tests show levels of one type of PFAS chemical in the drinking water that's more than 30,000 times what the EPA now considers to be unsafe.
The people who cause the pollution should be responsible for cleaning it up. You cause harm to someone else, you're responsible for fixing the problem. Common sense, common law. So the Navy needs to deal with this situation.
The situation extends far beyond Whidbey Island, with more than 700 military bases either known or suspected to have PFAS contamination. That means millions of Americans are potentially at risk, according to Melanie Benesh, Vice President of Government Affairs at the Environmental Working Group.
And so if you have been living near a military base for a long time, it's possible that you have been drinking water that's contaminated, and you could be at risk of seeing health effects from those exposures.
This summer, her organization looked at the 50 military sites dubbed the filthiest in the U.S. by Congress, spanning 30 states and including Whidbey Island, and found that while they've all launched investigations, none have begun the phase of actually cleaning up.
Part of it is just DoD slow walking this issue. They have known that PFAS are dangerous for decades. So I think the Department of Defense is committed to cleaning up these sites eventually. But the question is, how long is it going to take?
The Department of Defense refused an interview with Spotlight on America and did not answer our specific questions about timelines for cleanup. That leaves Whidbey Island residents like Brian Christensen with troubling questions. He lives just steps away from the base and sees the planes fly overhead every day.
My biggest concern is the not knowing. We just don't know what the long-term implications are. I'm going to be really sad someday if something happens to my kids because some chemical that wasn't being looked at properly affects them.
For Spotlight on America, I'm Chris Daniels.
There are several treatment methods for the environmental impacts, but they're costly, up to $18 million per pound to remove PFAS from wastewater.
Utilities are out there looking for them in advance of any federal regulation in order to have the information. That should bring us confidence as we move forward with treatment.
States are taking the lead when it comes to PFAS regulation, but nothing has been done on a national scale. According to SaferStates.com, there's 197 current policies in 33 states and 131 adopted policies in 25 states. Many of those are focused on restricting or banning PFAS in a wide range of products and regulating PFAS in firefighting, foam, and drinking water. Now, in 2021, Maine became the first state to ban non-essential uses of PFAS in all products. When it comes to national efforts, the House did pass legislation for the EPA to regulate forever chemicals in 2021, but that died in the Senate.
The Environmental Protection Agency proposed the first ever standards to protect America's drinking water from toxic forever chemicals back in March. The EPA says the maximum allowable limit should be the lowest level that tests can detect, 4 parts per trillion. The proposal also requires water providers to test for the contaminant. This could reduce exposure for nearly 100 million Americans and save thousands of lives, according to the EPA. And that was your big story breakdown tonight. You can find more about the impact and safety concerns surrounding PFAS on OKCFox.com.
And if you missed any part of this big story breakdown, you can find it all on our YouTube channel. Just scan the QR code on your screen or search OKC Fox.